Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Hoagland. I'm the Executive Director of Development for the Gold Prospectors Association of America. I've been metal detecting a long time, a very, very long time. Built my first detector when I was 9 years old and have been fascinated with everything about metal detecting since that time. One of the things that I really want to stress is that metal detecting is not complicated. It may feel complicated, especially if you've bought a machine in the last few years that has an awful lot of knobs and buttons and push pads and so on and like that. It may seem complicated, but it's really not. And today we're going to talk about the similarities, not the differences, but the similarities of all the different detectors. Doesn't matter if you own brand M, brand F, brand G, brand W, so on and so like that. It's the similarities, not the differences. Now, let's think about what a metal detector does. What we're doing when we're detecting is simply creating an electromagnetic field based upon a frequency range. So we're going to take a kilohertz or RF energy range. We're going to send that signal into the ground, creating an electromagnetic field. That field is going to go into the ground. It's going to find a target. Once it finds that target, if we're talking about VLF detection, it's going to put that energy into the target. The target's going to absorb a certain amount of energy, and once it absorbs energy based upon its conductivity level, it's going to release that energy, and that energy is going to return to the coil. Everybody got that? Really? Good job. It sounds a little complicated. The manufacturers have done a good job of creating this for us, but what I want you to think of, instead of complicating it to that level, what I want you to think of when you're out in the field is nothing more than dropping a rock in the water. What happens when you drop a rock in the water? You have a ripple. That ripple goes out, and if it hits something, what happens? The ripple comes back. So when you're sitting there looking at all the buttons and all the knobs and everything else on your detector, and it's just absolutely making you crazy, and you can't figure out what this is and what that is, and why this is happening and why that's happening, completely wipe the machine out, go back to your factory preset, go all the way back to the very, very beginning, and turn it on and think of nothing more than ripples in a stream or ripples in the water. It's just that simple. Now, before we get too far into this, I'd like to talk about the 3 questions that are the most frequently asked questions of me for all these years in the industry. Number 1, how deep will a detector go? Anybody have an idea how deep a detector will go? You know, this is the second day that I've asked that question and I haven't had somebody say $100 an inch, but we'll get by that. The number 2 question is the most asked question that I have is how small of a gold will a detector find? And the last one, is there a gold-only detector? You know what, let's answer these right now, but we're going to start at the bottom. Is there a gold-only detector? No, there's not. And that is because there is no such thing as pure gold in nature. There is no such thing. Now, do we know that there's a particular frequency response for gold? Absolutely. Do we know what it is? Absolutely. So if you were to have absolutely pure gold, 99.999 fine gold, and you have the luxury or the ability to hunt with your detector in the vacuum of space, we could actually make that work. Now, if that does happen, if you do get a chance to get on the shuttle, go up there and you've got some pure gold and you're out in the middle of space and you're doing a spacewalk and you have that opportunity, please get back to me and let me know how that worked out for you. Because here on the planet Earth, where I think most of us are probably going to do all of our detecting, we have this thing. We have a target. And what is the largest target you will ever detect with your detector? The Earth. The Earth is the largest target you will ever detect. And we have to think about that. So let's get back up to the rest of these questions. Number 1 is, how deep will the detector go? I'm sorry, we're going backwards. How small of gold will the detector find? Now, This is where we start getting into the conversations about mineralization and different things like that. You know, it's a nugget machine. It's designed to find gold nuggets. This is the stuff that you find with a pan. But can a metal detector find that? A lot of people will take a small vial of gold and they'll put it on the ground, they'll swing their detector over it, and it won't register. They cannot find it. And they think that their detector is faulty. It's absolutely not. If you have a small vial full of gold, and you're swinging your coil over it, remember what I said earlier about how the detector works. It sends a signal into the ground or into the target. And that target has to be large enough to create an eddy current to create the return. And that has to be the singular piece of gold, not the mass. Because if you start looking at it as thousands of little targets, after a while they start to interfere with themselves. So it's a singular target. That being said, you hear people talk about finding fly speck gold all the time, or they take an extremely high frequency detector, do this and do that. Is it capable? Absolutely. Depending upon the mineralization of the ground that you're working in. I can take a tiny, tiny piece of gold, and with the right mineralization, I can get it to have a return signal. But is that always going to be the way it is? So the answer is, how small a gold will a detector find? There really is no answer for that. There's too many factors, there's too many variables. Now, the last one kind of goes in the same line. How deep will a detector go? I've got a gold nugget this big, and it's buried 6 inches below the surface of the ground. Should be able to find that with any detector, correct? Come on, guys, this is interactive. But now let me put a solid cap of basalt over that, or put a solid cap of iron, magnetite over that. Am I still going to be able to find that? I might, if I have a detector that has the capability of working through the ground mineralization. It has to be able to make the ground disappear. Right. Now, there's a lot of other factors that has something to do with how deep a detector will go. And one of them that I really like to talk about is interference. This thing right here. We all have one. Almost everybody has one now. If you're hunting in the field, carry it with you, but turn it off. You'd have no idea how much interference this machine, this little thing right here, can actually cause you. I was working with a machine that was a prototype machine that was getting ready to go to launch, and there were 5 or 6 of us using the same exact machine, and I could be hunting and I would stop and just stop and lean on my detector. And anywhere from 2 to 3 seconds after that, my phone would ring. I was hearing that noise coming through my detector before the phone was actually registering the call. And speaking of which, let me turn the volume off. I was having that register on my phone. Now, that interference could mask a target signal. And if you mask a target signal, you're simply not going to find that target. Now, another big one is power lines. People don't realize how things can really mess up, how the interference can cause issues. This is a very simple power line, singular power line, very old power line. It probably bleeds a lot of electrical energy as it's going across the poles and this and that and everything else. That can create an incredible amount of interference to your detector that you may not even hear. Yes, sir.
Yes, we're talking about the cell phone interfering with your detector. Is that because it's Bluetooth? The reason I'm asking is with hearing aids that Bluetooth also interferes.
Okay, his question was, is Bluetooth a factor of interference? Bluetooth is a factor of interference. There are ways of mitigating that interference within Bluetooth headphones and some of the different things that they're doing that they've been able to lessen it. Most of it's the transmission frequency of the phone itself. You've got a transmission frequency that is one interference. You've got Bluetooth, which is another interference. You've got Wi-Fi acceptability, which is another interference. There's a lot of different things. That's why when I say, let's keep it simple, let's keep it very, very simple. I believe in keeping everything simple. I believe in the KISS process. Keeping it surprisingly simple. So, let's stay with that. Turn it off. When you're in the field, turn it off. Why take any chances and have anything that interferes with you? So, yes, sir.
What about, I use a hearing aid. Have you ever heard that ever cause any type of interference?
His question is that he wears hearing aids and he's asking if that has any interference. I've never known of anybody that's actually had an interference issue that I know of from a hearing aid. What I do hear a lot about is that they have problems with headphones. And there are a lot of companies now, there are a lot of companies now that are building compatible headphones to where you don't end up with the screen. Okay. Now, when we talk about the depth of the detector, with all the other instances that we talk about, there is one feature, or there is one factor that's based on physics that we really can't ignore. We can bend it a little bit, we can play with it, but we cannot ignore it, and that's simply the idea of frequency itself, which simply states the higher the frequency, the closer to the surface the machine works to find small targets, whereas the lower the frequency, the deeper in the ground the machine will go to find larger, more conductive targets. Now, metal detectors are based in kilohertz. The highest frequency machine that's on the marketplace right now is a 71 kilohertz. And again, I'm talking about VLF detectors. We're not talking about pulse induction. Is a VLF machine at 71 kilohertz. What 71 kilohertz means for those of you that haven't played around with the electronic side of it is that I have a cycle, and that cycle is one box of 1 second. And within that 1 second of time, that machine fires or transmits and receives 71,000 times. It's an incredible amount of energy. Now, when we think about that energy, what happens? If I take a 100-yard sprinter and tell them to run a 440, what happens to them? They collapse. They're great. They're the fastest the fastest person on the face of the earth in 100 yards, but you tell them to run 440 yards, it's not their job. It's not what they do. So they run out of energy. And that's basically what happens with extremely high frequency detectors. Now, on the other hand, you have low frequency detectors. And by the way, this is an actual sine wave of 1 second of a 71 kilohertz detector. And this is a sine wave of a 6.4 kilohertz detector, which is on the other side of that. Now, with the lower the frequency, what it has the tendency to do is it has a tendency to have a much narrower band, so it has the penetration power. It will penetrate much deeper, but you can see that we have a much narrower band in comparison. Does that mean that I can take a 71 kilohertz machine that's really good for small targets close to the surface and it won't go deep? Absolutely not. Does that mean that I can take a 6.4 kilohertz machine and it won't find small targets close to the surface? Absolutely not. This is where we bend the physics a little bit. If I have a high frequency machine and I want to get more depth out of it, what do? Put a bigger coil on it. I expand my hunt area. I expand my area going into the ground by simply putting a larger coil on it. If I take an extremely low frequency machine and when we talk about frequency, let's talk about something that let's talk about it in the way that we all understand it maybe a little bit better. Anybody ever heard of foghorn? Anybody ever heard a high-pitched foghorn? No. The foghorn is designed to penetrate that low frequency. So when we talk about low frequency, think about it in the lines of a foghorn. That ooh, that travels for miles out across the water. That low frequency. Simple way to think about it. You do the same thing with an extremely high-pitched sound. You're not going to hear that outside of the harbor. You're not going to hear that very far because that energy that energy expels its own energy. It runs out of energy. All right. So if I take a 6.4 kilohertz machine or a low frequency detector, and I want to find small targets close to the surface, what do? Smaller coil. A smaller coil creates a smaller pattern going into the ground, and that smaller pattern allows you to be able to hunt that machine differently. So think about this. If you haven't purchased a machine, if you don't have a detector, and to me, one of the other questions that I get is there that perfect one all-around detector? Unfortunately, I don't believe that there is. To me, detectors are tools in the toolbox. I can't use a single half-inch wrench to fix everything that breaks or everything that I need to take care of. And the crescent wrench doesn't do everything either. So they're tools in the toolbox. Talk to the people in the area that you're thinking about hunting. And if they tell you that they're finding small gold close to the surface, then you probably want to look at a higher frequency machine. If everybody's finding little tiny pieces of gold, really close to the surface within the first couple, 3 inches or 4 inches or whatever, then a high frequency machine will probably do very, very well for you. But if you talk to people and everything is about digging deep, digging deep, digging deep, they're finding all these deep targets. They've gone in there with all sorts of different machines, and some of them just aren't finding the gold. They've got to get deeper, so on like that. Think about the low frequency machine, because you can always swap coils around to achieve some of the different features that you want. Any questions on that? Yes, sir.
How come they sell the smaller coils just for, say, especially for gold? Then you just say that just for a shallow look for, say, 4 to 6 inches deep, a smaller coil with gold, finding gold?
Okay, I think your question is, if I understand right, is when they talk about gold-specific coils, that some of them are very, very small. Well, some of them are also very, very large. I mean, there's one manufacturer that makes a coil for their machine that's 14 inches. And what most people consider as the gold-only coil is because it's elliptical in shape. Okay, I'm probably going to get in trouble for going off track a little bit, but I'm going to give you a very quick explanation on the elliptical shape. Why are there elliptical shaped coils? Because they fit in between rocks better. That was in 1986, a company called Fisher created a machine called a gold bug, and it had an elliptical coil on it. And that very quickly became what everybody considered as the gold coil. But to this day, all coils are based on round. When companies sit down to do the math and create a coil, it's still all based on a round coil. It's not based on elliptical coil. But because of the success of the Fisher gold bug back in the mid-'80s, and how well that machine did, it became what is called the gold standard. Other companies actually came out with machines that were as good, if not better, than that machine, but they couldn't sell them because they had round coils on them. We all got to the point where we said, if it's not an elliptical coil, it's not a gold coil. So it was a brilliant marketing move, and it's something that's great for being able to work into areas, but that's the main reason behind it. Coil size is based on what your needs are for the area that you're working. Okay? All right, and while we're talking about that, the areas that you're working and so on, let's take a moment to talk about discrimination. We've had some hunts out here. For those of you that were in the hunts yesterday, this is really a good point into don't use your discriminator. I'm just going to say it the easiest way that I can. Don't use your discriminator. We had a gentleman yesterday, and it was a beautiful target, nice little tiny gold coin. Gold coin. What we're all looking for? Well, we're all looking for nuggets, but why not? I'll take a gold coin. And because it was mixed with another metal, a washer that was on the back side of it, he was using a level of discrimination that did not allow him to find it. He thought that he heard it, but he wasn't sure, but it was discriminated. So he just walked away from it. He came back over it 5 different times. I watched him dig the target once and move it off to the side, and then something clicked in his head. And he went back over it, lowered his level of discrimination way down, and was able to find that target. Please don't use discrimination. There are 4 different targets that are out there that are very similar in conductivity, and the metal detector works on the basic conductivity of the target. Does anybody know those metals? Lead, gold, aluminum pull tab, and nickel. They all sound different, but their conductivity is very, very close and the same. So if you're out there hunting in an area and you start trying to remove things like pull tabs, you're going to lose a lot of gold. You know, if you look at these beach hunters that are out there and they use no discrimination, the ones that are really, really successful and they're finding an incredible amount of little tiny gold rings, no discrimination. Any questions on that? God, that was simple. Those are some of the things of the basics based on the physics of the machines, the way the machines are created. Now I want to take some time to talk about the things that you can do. I can't talk, I can't do anything about the frequency that's set by the manufacturer. I can't do anything about, this and that. There are things that I just simply cannot control. But here are the things that you can control that will make you successful. Number one, understanding the ground balance of your detector. Understanding how to ground balance your machine and what different types of ground balances there are. Now, for this, it's very simple. We're going to say that this is, and we're going to talk first about a manually ground balanced detector. How many of you own a manually ground balanced detector? Okay. Here's my coil, and this is the depth of my detector. When I turn this machine on and I ground balance it, I am ground balancing it to a spot on the ground. That spot is all that machine remembers. I've balanced it here. It has no idea what the ground is over here. And this is where it becomes very, very important that if you own a manually ground balanced detector, that you constantly check it. This does not mean that you have to constantly tune the machine, but it does mean you need to check it. If I'm hunting in this room and this room has the same exact constant mineralization, I probably won't have to ground balance my machine a lot. But if I am in this room and there's changes in this ground mineralization, I'm going to have to ground balance. I'm going to have to stay on top of the ground. So what happens is, as I start to use this machine and there's a little bit of change in the mineralization, it does a real good job, but as that mineralization changes, it starts changing its pattern. And let's say I get out to about right here and my threshold starts to go wonky. My threshold starts to make a lot of noise. Well, the first thing I'm going to think of is, oh, threshold. It's time to rebalance. Or I'm sorry, ground balance. I'm hearing the threshold. It's time to re-ground balance. So I start pumping the machine up and down, and it's wildly out of ground balance. So I spend the time pumping it up and down, and we're going to let you hear how that actually functions in just a moment. And I re-ground balance that machine, and now all of a sudden I'm all the way back down to my depth. It's pretty nice, isn't it? Pretty simple to do. Unfortunately, I've missed every target within that area. If you have a manually ground balanced machine, the one thing that I would like for you to do, and it's the thing that I do constantly, is at the end of my swing, lift it up and down, listen to it. Just pump it up and down a couple of times. The beauty is once you have it ground balanced, you get to the end of the swing, you have very little to do. If you've got a machine that has a knob on it, generally it's no more than 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn to bring the machine back into balance. But always check it, swing it, pump it, and tune it if necessary. But do that constantly. Believe me, that sounds like a lot of work, but after a couple of days of doing this, it will become second nature. I even catch myself doing that with automatic machines. I catch myself at the end of the swing still pumping the machine up and down even though it's doing everything for me. Which brings us to automatic ground balance. Automatic ground balance, as I'm hunting, the machine does the same thing. It's reading the ground constantly. And all of a sudden, how many of you in here have automatic ground balancing detectors? How many of you, as you are hunting, have heard the null? You're hunting. You've got a beautiful threshold. You've got You get this brief null. If that happens to you, please stop and back up and swing back over that null. Swing it the way you were going and turn your detector 90 degrees and swing back over that null. Because generally what the reason for that null is it is an extremely high mineralization spike. And that extremely high general mineralized spike is generally associated with the target. So as you're swinging the detector, if you get that brief null as you're moving forward, stop, back up, go back over it, take your boot, do a quick little boot dig, and listen. 9 out of 10 times you're going to find out that there was a target there. The automatic ground balancing was working so fast that when it hits something like that mineralized spike, it takes a moment for it to catch up. And the only way that it tells you that it has to tell you to, like, whoa, stop, is to just go null. So if you have the null, go back and check it. You know what? Let's take a look at the process of manually ground balancing and automatically ground balancing. We'll walk through it. Now, well, remember, all we're doing is making the ground underneath the coil disappear. So let's take a look at manual ground balance. Nice and quiet. Now, did anybody hear what happened during this ground balancing process? The machine.
When he moved the coil, the sound changed and he came back and ground balanced it right there.
The machine went out of balance because we were ground balancing to one spot, moved the machine over a little bit, and had to re-ground balance. That's why checking your ground balance is very, very important. Now, with the manually tuned detector, they've made it very, very simple. When you start to pump the machine up and down, it's going to make a noise. With 99% of the machines that are on the marketplace right now, is if the machine makes a noise going down, you turn or use the rocker and turn it down, like a volume control. So if it makes a noise going down, turn it down. If it makes a noise going up, turn it up. Once it is equalized, and that is the detector's way of telling you, you have now made the ground underneath my coil disappear. And it's a perfect ground balance. But as you observed, if I move that even an inch or two, I have to re-ground balance because I've changed my area of detection. It remembers what's underneath that coil, all right? That's very, very important. Very important. Not to make sure that you ground balance in the right place, but to absolutely make sure that you're checking that ground balance as you're using the detector. All right, let's listen to an automatic ground balance and go through that process very quickly as well. With this one, it's fairly simple. I'm going to turn the detector on, and we're going to establish a threshold, and we'll talk about threshold in a little bit because it is your detector's voice. And we're going to pick our function. And then from there, the machine has done its process, it's ground balanced, it's ready to go. It seems to be a lot quicker, it does a lot of things like that. And a question that I have constantly is, well, is one better than the other? No, they're different. They're absolutely different. I'm kind of a old school guy. How many of you liked DOS back in the days of DOS? I love DOS because DOS gave me complete and total control over my detector. You know, or it gave me complete and total control over my computer. So, you know, there are times, and I hunt both machines. Even my automatic ground balance machines have a manual function on it to where I can still hunt it as a manually tuned machine. There's not one that's better than the other. It's a matter of working with the machine that you have, learning how to work it properly, and being able to work that material that way. Any questions on ground balancing? Gosh, did you guys get it that easily? I'm proud of you. The next one that we have complete and total control over is sensitivity. Now, folks, if you don't take anything else away from this today, sensitivity is the one thing that I want you to learn how to adjust that will make you successful. Yes, sir.
We have one question on when you're ground balancing, when it goes down, do you turn the frequency up?
Well, on most machines, if it's going, when the coil goes towards the ground, if it makes a noise going down, most of the machines are designed to where you turn the knob or use the rocker into the negative or the downs or the down or counterclockwise position. When you're going up, you turn it, either use the positive or you use the knob to turn it up. Just think of it as volume control. It's going up, I want to turn it up. It's going down, I want to turn it down. They could have made it to where when it goes down, you do this, but you know, why do that? Why complicate it? Let's keep it simple. Keeping it surprisingly simple. If it makes a noise going down, turn it down. Makes a noise going up, turn it up. Okay, sensitivity. How many of you in here bought your first detector, went out, read the, no, let's be honest. How many of you bought your first detector, threw batteries in it, turned it on, and cranked the sensitivity, power, gain, whatever they, you know, whatever the manufacturer calls it, all the way up because you knew it was going to go deep? I love the honesty in this group. And I got another guy sitting back there, had his arms kind of crossed. The arms started to go up, and then I went, yeah, I'm not going to admit to this one. You know what? We've all done it. There's one thing to think about sensitivity. Your sensitivity on this detector is not TX. It's RX, meaning that there is no transmit sensitivity, power, or gain that you can adjust. That's done by the factory. If it's a 17 kilohertz machine, it's 17 kilohertz. That's what it's putting into the ground. What I can adjust on my sensitivity, power, and gain is my receive. It's how that signal is returned. Now, sometimes less is more. Here's what I'd like for you to do. I think we have this on video, don't we? Let's do this. Let's take a look at how to set your sensitivity properly, and then we'll kind of go through it and talk about it piece by piece. When I'm going to set my sensitivity, I'll shut up.
The sensitivity and matching it to the ground that you're working, and not just a factory preset. First, you're going to turn your detector on and turn your volume all the way up. I'm going to turn my sensitivity all the way down, establish a good, just a perfect threshold, which again is that mosquito buzzing by your ear. Then I'm going to do a quick ground balance. Got a perfect ground balance. I'm going to adjust the threshold just a little bit. Bring it up. Now I'm going to hold the coil about a ½ inch off the ground and turn my sensitivity up until that threshold starts to become unstable. You hear how the threshold's starting to get erratic? At that point, I'm going to back off just a little bit. The threshold stabilizes. Make it just a slight adjustment. I've got a good, clean, perfectly set threshold, which again sounds like a mosquito buzzing by the ear, and I've now set the sensitivity to the ground that I'm working. Check your ground balance. And the machine's ready to hunt.
Now I'm going to quickly go through these steps again, but in your new mining guide, in the brand new mining guide that you've gotten, page CU29 covers this very much in detail, and I would like for you to spend some time reading over that and understanding exactly how this works. That's page CU 29. Now, it's not the TX sensitivity, it's the RX sensitivity. So I've got an incredible amount of power coming out of my detector, and when that 50 kilohertz, the 50 kilohertz leaves the coil. As soon as it leaves the coil, what is it doing, folks? It begins to what? Decay. As soon as that energy leaves the coil, that energy starts to decay. Remember, it is finite. It doesn't go on forever. So as that energy leaves the coil, it goes into the ground, and it finally gets down and does what? Hits the target. All right, let's go back to the very, very beginning, and remember, this is interactive. And what happens when it hits the target? Creates the eddy current, correct? Once the eddy current's created, it sends the signal back. Think of it this way. I've got a piece of gold sitting in the ground. I send this incredible amount of energy into the ground. As it goes down, it's decaying, 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 decaying. I hit the target, creates the eddy current. The eddy current is finally released and it's starting to come back up. It's not much of a signal anymore, is it? This signal has been weakened. So as that signal starts to come back up, I think if I turn my sensitivity higher and higher and higher, I'm going to be able to get that signal to respond better. But remember, I'm putting energy into the ground, and I'm also charging all the ground around it. So if I start turning that energy up too much, or that sensitivity up too much, I'm actually going to start hearing the ground. I've charged the ground. And as that ground is becoming charged, as I turn that sensitivity up, I actually start hearing more of the ground, because ground is what? A larger signal, correct? What's the biggest target you'll ever detect? Exactly. So I've got a much bigger target than the target that I already have in the ground. All right, so as that energy starts to come up, as it comes back up, if I start turning that up too high, I can actually go right past it. So what I want you to do from now on, exactly what's in here and exactly what's described in the mining guide, turn your sensitivity down, set the machine up, get it ready to go, set your threshold, set your ground balance it, set your threshold, turn the machine up, listen to your threshold, and as soon as that threshold becomes erratic, stop and back off. Because now what you've done is you've matched that detector to the ground that you're working and not just some arbitrary number. Okay? Factory presets are great. And I tell everybody, I want you to hunt the factory presets until you've learned how to walk forward, swing your detector, and not trip over the coil. Okay? For most of you, that's about the first 30 seconds. So after that, start setting the machine to the ground. The other thing is that I want you to do is, you see the sensitivity and you see it on all the machines as 1 through whatever. Folks, if you have to, take the black pen and mark out those numbers. Forget about the numbers. Don't ever think about it as 1 through whatever. Think about it as setting it to the ground. Right? Let's get away from this linear thought. Whatever works, works. I have a machine that I hunt with from 1 to 30. Factory presets 12. I hunt in one area, I hunt between 4 and 5. And I'm still digging targets at 2.5 foot, 3 foot deep. Forget about those numbers. Forget about that sensitivity number. Forget about all of that. Set the detector to the ground that you're working. Okay? One of the last things we're going to talk about is threshold. I hope, because I drug you in here just for this, that helped. Did it? Good. Threshold. Threshold is your detector's voice. It will tell you everything. You know, you've got a voice. I'm standing here. I have the opportunity to talk to you. You have the opportunity to talk to me. Your detector talks to you through your threshold. Now, starting on CU29, we start talking about the threshold. The threshold is a very, very important setting because, again, it is your detector's voice. Learn to listen to it. If you've got your threshold set up too high, you're going to miss targets. If you've got it set too low, you're going to miss targets. What you want to have with a VLF detector is you want a threshold that sounds like a mosquito buzzing by your ear. You want to have this, it might be faster, it might be slower, but what I want you to start doing is after you have that threshold set like that, I want you to listen to the rhythm. The rhythm of the threshold is very, very important because all thresholds are rhythmic when properly set. And believe me, folks, I've done this with every machine on the marketplace that has a threshold setting. And they're all the same. They sound a little bit different, the tone's a little bit different, whatever. Speed is whatever. But they all have the rhythm. Listen to the rhythm. Now, I'm going to give you an example of a target, and I want you to tell me when you hear that target. This is always hard for me to do. Wow, somebody just hurt my machine. Did you hear that break? Did you hear that broke the rhythm? That was a target. That was a 27-ounce gold nugget found at 24 inches. And it was nothing more than a break in the threshold. Listen for those breaks. That's what you're listening for. When you hear that, stop. Come back over it, swing over it, take your boot, dig over it. Because the first time, all it was just a small break in the threshold. Did the boot dig? Get out the pick, start digging. Dug down, beautiful piece of gold. Found with a VLF detector, and it was there. I'd walked over it before, I can tell you that. I'd absolutely walked over that same target before. Your threshold will tell you if you're going too fast. It'll tell you if you're going too slow. If you're hunting your detector properly and you have your coil flat on the ground, at the end of your swing, if you come back too fast, if you're swinging too fast, at the end of the swing, if your threshold goes on the way back, slow down. That's your detector screaming at you, hey, you just overran your own signal. Slow down. Okay? It's the metal detector's voice. Any questions on threshold? Gosh, you guys are good. So let's bring all this together very, very quickly. And you'll find this on CU30. Go through the steps. Turn your detector on. Set a proper threshold. Do a proper ground balance. Do a proper ground sensitivity. Remember, we're setting everything to the ground. We're not setting it to a factory preset. We're not setting it to a number that was done by some of us just throwing darts on a board or doing this or doing that. You're setting it to the ground. You're setting it for the maximum opportunity that you can have. Now, I want to talk about some things about your head, about this thing right here. How many of you carry a test piece into the field with you? How many of you rely on that test piece because you think it's going to help you find a piece of gold? Okay. And how many of you only dig a target that sounds like your test piece? That was the right answer back there. Head is shaking, absolutely not. Folks, having a test piece is fantastic. Take a poker chip. If you don't want to put a gold nugget on a poker chip, take a little piece of lead. Remember what we talked about earlier? What are the four metals that have the same conductivity as gold? Okay, got most of them right. Lead, nickel, aluminum pull tab, and gold all have basically the same conductivity. Take a little chunk of 22 bullet or 22 lead that you're going to find while you're out there detecting. Believe me, you're going to find the lead. Take that, put it on there. And all this is for is to help you understand and know that your detector is working properly. Well, you know, I've seen people air test and they love to air test and they do this and they do that. Air testing's great. It keeps your head in the game. It tells you that your detector is working. But do me a favor, the first time you find a piece of gold floating 4 foot off the ground, come get me. Because I'm going to go hunt with you for the rest of my life. You've done something I couldn't do. Your test piece is to keep your head in the game. I carry a test piece with me all the time. If I'm out hunting and I'm in an area where I've got constant mineralization, after a while your mind starts to wander, your brain starts to wander, that threshold starts to wander, and sometimes you'll actually start to wonder if your machine's working properly. Throw that test piece out there, swing over it, bring your head back into the game. That's what it should be for. Don't become dependent upon it. Now, the one last thing I really want to talk about, and it's something that is very, very important because I've watched so many people miss targets, like actually two things, have missed targets because of this. And I love this part of it. And we cover this in the mining guide on CU 31. How many of you dug a target, or you got a really nice signal, and you started to dig on the target and suddenly the target went away? How many of you walked away from the hole? Thank you for being honest. There's a thing called the halo effect, and I'm going to go over this very, very quickly. A lot of people there's been a lot of conversation about halo. There's no such thing as what? There's no such thing as pure gold. What are some of the minerals that gold is associated with? Pardon? Metals, other metals. Silver. What else? Copper, iron. Okay. Does silver rot? Silver rots. Does iron rot? Does copper rot? All of these other metals, will gold rot? Absolutely not. I've got a piece of gold sitting in the ground. That piece of gold has been sitting in the ground for millions of years. And through moisture and everything else, all the other metals begin to leach out of it. Now, as it leaches into the ground, it does what? I've got silver. I've got a piece of gold that's got a lot of silver attached to it, and that silver, over millions of years, leaches out. It goes into the ground. I've got a chunk of ground that's now loaded full of silver. Is that a target? It can be. It can actually be a target. So now I swing my coil over it and I get this really great signal. Wow, I got a target. It's really big. Or a good target. So I swing back over it a couple of times and I make sure it's there, and it's like, okay, I'm going to dig this. So I take my pick, I start to dig onto the ground. As soon as I break that halo, it collapses. But the ground is still energized. So I start to dig, that halo collapses. But the energy is still there. I've energized the ground. So now when you swing back over it, you may or may not get a target response. I'm going to say a lot of times you simply won't, or else we wouldn't be having this part of the conversation. Folks, when this happens, do not walk away from the hole. There is a big chance that it's probably a piece of boot tack or a piece of iron or something. But there's also a good possibility it could be a good piece of gold. Remember, there's no such thing as pure gold in nature. Anything that's in the ground that will leach into the ground will leach into the ground. You find this a lot when you deal with a lot of the guys back east that are calling in relic hunters. They can almost tell you the nail because of the color of the ground as they're starting to dig down. Okay. A lot of different things. Lastly, keep your head in it. Keep your head in the hunt. If you find a target, stay on that target. Learn to hunt, learn to grid hunt. Grid hunting is very, very important. And this is another spot where a lot of people have issues. I'm out swinging my detector in this big, vast desert area. And I'm just looking for an area to hunt. Right now, I'm just swinging my detector and I get a signal. Well, I dig down and that's a gold nugget. So now I'm going to establish a grid. And I'm going to hunt this area, and we're just going to call this north and south and so on. I'm going to hunt this constantly north and south until I've got that grid area done. Let's call it a 10 by 10 grid. Now, as soon as I finish hunting it one direction, I'm going to hunt it the other direction. And when I get finished hunting it that direction, I'm going to turn and hunt it this direction. Because the gold could be in a different orientation. If I found a piece of gold, if you're out on a stream and you find a nice piece of gold, are you going to go to somewhere else on that stream? You're going to stick with where you found the gold. Stick with the spot. Now from this, if I find more gold, this will dictate. If I find another piece of gold here, nothing else over here, then I'm going to move that same grid this way. And then I'm going to keep working it until I'm out of that gold. But that's very, very important. Slow down, put your head in the game, believe in a grid. A lot of us, believe it or not, carry chains. If you've ever heard of chaining, we'll hook a chain on the back of our pants, and as we walk and we turn, we'll throw the chain around, but we always know exactly where we've been. Keep your head in the game. Any questions? I know I threw a whole lot at you, didn't I? Okay. Well, that's it. Go find some gold. Thank you, folks.